Welcome everybody who's tuned in for Archives Live. I'm Samantha Mackey and I'm here with David Peters, head of OSU Archives. David, how are you today?
Just wonderful. It's great to be with you again, Sam.
It's good to hear. So thank you all for joining us today. This month we're talking about World War II and its impact on OAMC's campus. So David, can you tell us what were the first changes OAMC made when the U.S. entered the war?
Actually, let me tell you a little bit before we entered the war. So beginning in the late 30s, of course, the war had started in Europe by 38, 39. And so we began adjusting some of our programs on campus, especially in engineering, to kind of prepare for the possibility of us entering the war. And so we were doing some more things with aircraft design and aircraft maintenance. And so some of those things started before the war. But then immediately after the declaration of war in December of 1941, President Bennett made a trip that next week to Washington, D.C. First, there was rumors that he might get a position in the federal government. That didn't happen, but he returned to Stillwater with a number of contacts that he had made, and so we began making preparations almost immediately to provide for training to occur on campus and to kind of adjust our programs here to allow for those military trainings that he had arranged and created contracts for. So we quickly do this kind of turn into war mode, and Bennett worked with a number of other colleges around the country to kind of help coordinate all of their programs, sort of enhance the things in agriculture and engineering especially.
Great. So how did the academic programs on campus change?
So they increased, first of all, like I said, in engineering, a number of programs were kind of enhanced. But then they also changed the schedule. So we'd been on a semester system, and they went to a 3-semester system, so a trimester system. And so I think they had 16-week classes, so 3 sets of 16-week sessions. So we went year-round then to kind of both move those who were in these programs through the system quicker, but then also for people coming into the program, they could get through in a faster period of time. And so they went to that trimester system almost immediately. And then not only with engineering, but also in agriculture, there was going to be, we knew there'd be a need for food and food supplies. It's kind of a critical element during wartime. And so some of the agricultural programs also expanded almost right away to make sure we were doing what we could to make sure the food supplies were secure. And then smaller things, even like there were victory gardens on campus almost immediately, where people were growing food on campus to supplement some of our meal programs and those kinds of things. So,
Great. How was the role of women on campus impacted with so many male students serving in the war?
So almost immediately our male student population began dropping by 42, 43. It had dwindled quite a bit for traditional college students. And so the women on campus now were given a chance really for the first time in a lot of ways to take leadership roles. And they stepped up. We knew they could, they'd never had the opportunity before. And so they began serving in student government. They began serving as editors. And so I think in 1943 or 44, maybe in 43, the editor of the college paper, the editor of the yearbook, the editor of the Aggivator, which was a humor magazine at the time, the president of the Student Government Association were all women. And so they took over many of those leadership positions on campus. Plus they began, even on campus, we have a fire protection station, we have a fire station, but fire protection services were a training opportunity for men. And during the war, women began serving as firemen, firewomen. And so that was another opportunity they had to fill those kinds of roles. And they took advantage of that in a number of different ways on campus. So.
Great. We have a question from William.
Okay.
And he asks, how were faculty and staff affected by the draft? And did any volunteer?
So we had a number of faculty who volunteered to serve. Some of them had military experience before. One of our deans, Dean of Engineering, Philip Donnell, stepped away from his activities here on campus, became a colonel, and served overseas and here stateside. So there were quite a few who, both from administration on to regular faculty, who left temporarily. Pete Lohman, who was also a new faculty member in engineering, stepped away. I think he was in the Marines for a while. And then this is kind of related to that, but there were also individuals who came to campus for various military training programs who would later come back to campus. Bennett Basor was in engineering as a trainee, as a student. And he later comes back and is on the faculty here. A fellow by the name of Robert Comm attends radio school here during the war. Later comes back to be Dean of our Arts and Sciences and eventual OSU president. So there was a lot of people, both as students and as faculty, who either would step away or had training here and brought them back. So
great, thank you. If you're just now joining us, I'm here with David Peters for Archives Live. This month we're talking about World War II and its impact on OAMC's campus. So if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments below and we will answer them live on stream. So David, you've talked about these military training programs before. Can you tell us a little bit more about what these programs were?
So there were programs in radio communications and radar. There were programs clerical programs for women. The waves were brought to campus, and they were taught like shorthand and typing and those kinds of things. I think we had over 11,000 waves. We were one of 4 or 5 national training programs for waves. And so they were brought to campus in a series of trainings. So usually, I think they were here for probably about 4 or 5 months, and then another group would come in. And aircraft maintenance, aircraft construction. We had a flight school. We also had some language training that occurred here. And I recently just heard that we even had some people involved with working with some of the code breaking activities that were trained at A&M. And so there's a variety of different programs that impacted a lot of people during the war, where they received their training here and go off and serve.
Okay. So with so many members of military training programs on campus, how did campus have to adjust to accommodate all of them?
So the demographics changed dramatically. One of the first things that happened, many of the fraternities on campus, in fact, I think there were 11 of them eventually, who, since they had very few members living at these fraternity houses, made the houses available for traditional students on campus who weren't in military training programs to live in the fraternity houses off campus, that then freed up the spaces on campus, the dormitory spaces on campus and residence halls, to make available for training programs. The fraternities were called Victory Halls, and so I think it were Victory's Halls 1 through 11. And so a lot of traditional students stayed in the Victory Halls. I mentioned the going to the trimester thing. That impacted a lot of the other programs then with training. Of course, we talked about women stepping up, so that changed too. Then we brought in some temporary classrooms, so that those were changes to the physical campus. I'm trying to think of some other things that impacted the campus. But we really went to a wartime stance, and I think we figured that we were a part of this great effort and doing what we could locally. On campus, there was just and some of the faculty, of course, were leaving, so they just had to do a lot of shuffling to make accommodations for all of these changes that were occurring fairly quickly. But I think one of the major ones was moving many of the traditional students off campus to free up campus housing for military training programs.
Great. Okay. Well, we have a question from Anthony.
Okay.
And he asked, was the Oklahoma State University Army ROTC around during the war?
Yes, it was. It had been active actually since the end of World War I, and we had, I think, one of the largest ROTC units. In fact, maybe the 3rd or 4th largest in the nation at the time. I think after Penn State and maybe Ohio State, I think we were like 3rd or 4th. And so yes, they were very active on campus and involved with both traditional classic higher education training plus military training plus their officer training for entering the service.
Great. Well, I know you have some photos.
Yes.
So would you like to share with us?
Sure. Let's take a look at a few. This first one is actually from 1939, so it's before we've entered the war, but already we're working with, this is an aircraft wing, but there are people working on aircraft design and maintenance. And then here's one actually during the war. And this picture is taken in the old, well, it was a mechanical lab. I'm not sure what the official name was. It's a building that was recently torn down next to Engineering East. So this is in that large facility that is no longer with us. But this is during the war, and you can see how. And here they've moved on from balsa wood to metal. There was a flight training school here, and actually the Stillwater Airport was known as Searcy Field at the time. And I think it was actually OSU property. At least at some point it was OSU property before it switched to the city. But they had training there. And so here's a picture of one of the groups in flight training school. Here they are, probably closer to graduation, but they're all out of now is the Stillwater Airport. There's someone in the cockpit. This is a picture of a gentleman who had gone through training. This picture was sent after he'd gone to serve overseas, and so he sent this back, kind of, I guess, highlighting his. This is one of our faculty members. I'm sorry I couldn't find his name right away, but he did serve in the Air Corps during the war. Here's just another picture of some people. I think this is after they'd left Stillwater and was sent back to show their service at the time. Here's the Dean, Philip Donnell, who was Dean of Engineering. At this point, he's serving as a colonel in the Army. And we were very involved with, there's a lot of logistics that go into war and military activity. And so he was very instrumental in some of the construction projects and these construction crews, because they have to make sure there's bridges and access and roads. And so Donnell was active in those kinds of things. Here's a picture of some of the waves. That's Willard Hall. I'm sorry, that's not Willard, that's Murray Hall behind them. And so these happen to be Willard roommates, but many of them lived in both Willard and in Murray Hall. Let's see, I think we've got it. Here's typing. So that was one of the skills that they learned. And we have 11,000 cards for each individual wave, but we have like their test scores on their typing speeds and their shorthand abilities and that kind of stuff. Here they are in a typing class where they had the old manual typewriters. And then the women also marched, so it wasn't just learning clerical stuff. They marched and had formation, and so they marched on campus. So we've got several pictures here showing them either preparing or marching. And through the streets of town, they would go down all around campus. I'm not sure if they would close down the streets or just, but there was a lot of marching going on. And here they are. I'm not sure what it's probably shorthand or dictation. No, not dictation. It must be shorthand. But they learned shorthand, dictation, and typing. And then here's a large group. They probably completed their coursework here, so they're in front of Morrill Hall. And this is, I think one of the largest groups we have of them pictured together on the steps of Morrill Hall. This is a training, I think it's in electrical engineering, and it may be related to the radio or radar school, but there's some training going on there. This is another group. These are probably instructors. And then the men would march both around campus and in town. Here they are going by Old Central. Here's the military band. I think this is out on the lawn near Old Central at the time. Here they are. They're on campus. It may be Athletic Avenue or Farm Road. It could be Farm Road with the barn in the background. But they would march all the way, getting place to place. This was a cafeteria that was built just north of where the library is now. It's now the International Mall area. but they built this temporary cafeteria and bookstore at that location. And here shows being utilized by military personnel during the war. And so you have to think of all these logistics of feeding everyone, housing them, and so it was quite a. You ask about campus changes. There were a number of these changes to provide for these training opportunities here on campus. And Bennett was always very proactive about those kinds of things, and so we were receiving quite a bit of federal assistance for this. Here's just a group of soldiers in town. I'm not sure what they're working on here. Looks like maybe tearing out an engine from a car or something. Here are three of the women in leadership roles. I think those are the three editors of the publications: the college newspaper, the yearbook, and then the humor magazine, the Aggivators. Oh, and here are two of the women who acted as volunteer firemen during the war. And I'm not sure if they actually got into the official training program or they just volunteered and got temporary training, but they served in the fire department and helped cover the fire station, which is located in the southeast corner of campus. And here's that's President Bennett on the right, but we had a service flag in World War I, and so the stars signified individuals who were serving. Also, certain colors of stars, gold stars, meant they'd given their life in service. And so we had a service flag. We actually had two of them, but this is an early World War II now, but they have that service flag from World War I think is kind of a memorial in the background to remind people of the service. We never did develop a service flag for World War II. We had a much larger number of people who provided service during World War II. It may have been too big to manage all of that. So, and then it's amazing. Almost every picture we have during that period, there's someone in uniform. The gentleman third from the left is later to be President Oliver Willem, and then I'm not sure who else. I can't recognize a lot of those folks, but invariably pictures during that time period, someone is in uniform. This is one of the military trainers on campus. I'm sorry, I don't have his name either, but there were military personnel who were providing training in addition to our faculty on campus. And then this is a picture. During the war, our alumni magazine both would share information about people who had enlisted and maybe where they had gone for training, things that could be revealed without revealing too much, but there'd be these reports back then from folks in service. Often they, is now in Hawaiian Islands or serving in the European theater or something, but there'd be these reports back, and oftentimes they'd be accompanied with pictures of them. Let's see what we got here. Here's just another picture on campus. The gentleman in uniform has been injured. He's on crutches. This is another picture from someone who was serving overseas. Looks like they're probably in the Pacific someplace, who's saying a picture back. These are some of the temporary units that were brought into campus, both to allow for training and provide additional spaces during the war. Some of these were used for classrooms, as offices, as labs, sometimes as homes. So this is an area also just kind of north of the library, roughly where Engineering North is now. And you can see Gallagher-Iba Arena and the football stadium in the back, and old Cordell Hall back behind it. But we brought in a number of these Quonset huts and temporary structures, both during the war and after the war. And then also, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but here's a picture of what was Vet Village, which was the northwest part of campus. Bennett here was also very proactive. He knew as the war was kind of coming to an end, and especially with the passage of the GI Bill, now there'd be a great influx of students, many of whom have never had an opportunity to go to college, to return to Oklahoma and to attend Oklahoma State University. And so, and many of these were older people. Many of them were married. Some of them had already started families. And so they brought in this temporary housing as many of the camps were training had taken place across the country. As they were breaking down their structures and buildings, Bennett had made arrangements to have them haul that to Stillwater, and they put up these villages really in very short periods of time. And so this was Vet Village, which was in the northwest part of campus. They had their own laundry, and they had their own commissary. They had child care facilities out there. They had their own grocery store and activity center. It was really kind of a village in itself. And they had their own newspaper and mayor. So that's kind of post, but it was an impact of the war. And then here's one last picture we have. Many maybe people have seen recently there was the gentleman who was kissing the woman in New York Times in the Times Square at the end of the war. So that day was kind of marked with celebration. Well, on that same day, this is the corner of University and Knobloch, and so crowds had gathered at that corner to celebrate the end of the war. And so this is our kind of homage to that wonderful day when the war was declared over. It's the campus theater was at that corner. Now it's where the Hideaway is located. But people gathered, at that intersection in campus to celebrate the ending of the war.
That's really cool. So we have a question from Neil, and he asked, which year would you say that the true military impact ended on campus? Would it be late 50s, mid 50s, or when would that be?
From this war, well, that's a good question, Neil, because the impact of the war is felt through the late 40s into the early 50s. I mean, that war experience impacted those students' lives, especially those people who returned. And so I'd say in the late 40s, early 50s. And by then now we start getting into Korea, and there's kind of another little blip for Korea. But the war really had an impact on campus and our demographics in a lot of ways into the early 50s.
Okay, and then we have a question from Anthony, who asked, did everyone wear uniforms to school during the war?
If you were in the military, you did. If you were in military service, you wore a uniform. And so for those people who had come here for military training, of course they wore uniforms. For those students in ROTC, they would wear uniforms. So yeah, in fact, it was probably rare for someone not to wear a uniform on campus during the war. And so no matter what branch of service you were in, male, female, a lot of people wore uniforms. So yeah, that was very common.
And then we have another question from Carla, and she asked, were the temporary Quonset huts used after the war?
Yes, they were used for quite an extensive period of time. They were considered temporary, but some of those Quonset huts, I think, lasted longer than some of our original permanent buildings. I mean, it was amazing that they just had a life of their own. I remember them still in the 80s. There were still Quonset huts near the center part of campus. And it took a long time to dismantle Vet Village. It was there for a long time too. Some of the two-story units, I think, were well into the 80s. And so these lasted 30, 40 years in many places around campus. So they had quite a lifespan. And yeah, the Quonsets and the Hutments. And these weren't, I mean, they were stable structures, but they certainly weren't luxurious at all. I mean, they were, in fact, Oratupa, which was a training kind of camp south of 6th Street, where the Stillwater Medical Center is now. There were 400 of these. They were tar paper. They was just a wood frame with tar paper. I can't imagine how cold they would have been in the wintertime. They would have 2 light bulbs. That was it. You'd have 2 to 3 bunk beds. So you'd have 4 to 6 people living in a room that's 16 by 16. But they lasted actually probably for 10 or 15 years, and then they disappeared. So.
Okay. Well, David, we're sitting in front of some posters from World War II. So can you tell us a little bit more about these posters?
So this is just a sampling of the many posters we have during World War II. In World War II, posters would be like the social media of our day, and so they were very common to find posters displayed on any public building, post offices. They were just all over the place, and it was a way of getting the message out regarding a number of different activities. Buying war bonds, service, being careful about what you talked about. So they would censor things if it was too sensitive. But it was really the social media of the day, and so we literally have dozens and dozens of posters which reflect that period of time in World War II. Some people might call it propaganda, but I really prefer really social media and a communications avenue to get the word out. It was a visual. They were easy to understand and relate to, and so it was a way of promoting various activities and really people's intimate involvement with the war. You could learn about through these posters. So they're very common. Public buildings had them all over the place, and we're very thankful to have a number of those here. So.
Well, one last question before we go. If I wanted more information about World War II and how it affected campus, where could I look in the collections for that?
So we have a number of individual collections, like we have a waves collection
Mm-hmm.
that specifically talks about the waves. We have a number of collections related to engineering. It talks about the College of Engineering and their involvement with the war. And so we have specific collections in the university archives. Very few of them which are available online. So they would need to come to us, visit us on the second floor of the Edmund Lowe Library. We're at the East End. But we have collections specifically about World War II. And then we have other collections that may have information about them within them. So maybe they're not specifically about World War II, but there'll be information about the war and the impact of the war. And then we have a series of Centennial History collections. And so we'll have one on student life and services that'll talk about the impact of the war on students. So we have a number of different collections that we're happy to share with people. One of the collections we have digitized is the Waves. It's not available for online access right yet. I think we're getting very close. But at some point, they'll be able to access all those wave cards. And we get requests from people all over the country who have discovered that their mother, usually it's a mother or grandmother, trained here, and so they want information about them. And so we can usually look up their name and pull their card and provide that information to them. So
That's great.
Mhm.
Well, David, thank you for chatting with us today. And of course, thank you to you, our viewers, for tuning in and commenting and sharing your questions in the comment. If you like this video, please feel free to like it and share it. You can go to our Facebook page for more posts and more photos and more information. Don't forget to check out all of the archives videos on OState TV and YouTube. The website will be listed at the end of the show. And as always, we will see you next month, and thanks again for tuning in.